So today we have this, or this week, I should say, this new reporting about Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was a mainstream figure in the media in the 2010s, who made waves by calling for reparations in America. And this was the cover of the Atlantic. It became something that was just milled over and over and over by the media. It was a young black man, journalist, who was making the maximalist case about America. And that maximalist case, of course, was that America owed all of its black citizens or even residents reparations, money. This was not something that was about to go away anytime soon. It was only the beginning, because what was only about a decade later, maybe even less, maybe it was about 6, 7 years later, where we had Nicole Hannah-Jones pop onto the scene with the punchline to Ta-Nehisi Coates' setup. And for Nicole Hannah-Jones, it was not only does America owe reparations to Black Americans, but we are still today living in a slave society, a slaveocracy. That was what the New York Times put out with the infamous 1619 Project, which bent all the rules of journalism, sort of redefined what journalism is by putting this weird work of revisionist history in its Sunday magazine and then milling it out to college campuses, K-12 educational curricula, programs with Oprah, podcasts, children's books, you name it. I mean, does that sound like journalism to you? To me, it sounds like what it actually is, a massive form of brand advertising, this really strange but incredibly effective way to put out a very radical idea. What Ta-Nehisi Coates began in the early 2010s culminated in around 2020, 2021 with the BLM riots, with activists that included Antifa and included NGOs funded by upstream foundations like Tides Foundation, billion-dollar foundations, convulsing the country, convulsing America in the middle of a pandemic. Why? Well, because as we know from Ben Rhodes and co., the Obama political strategist, you never fail to make use of a good crisis. It's an opportunity. That was one of these Obama land zingers. It sounded very clever, and the media thought it was very clever. And it was clever because of what happened. Well, the BLM riots and the pandemic together, that was the crisis that was exploited, successfully managed to derail Trump's presidency and probably cost him the presidency, which was the entire point. Was this really about restoring Black Americans to some state of grace when what happened after that, including with Ibram Kendi, was these organizations that took millions from donors, squandered the money, squandered it. Shaun King, the faux Black, the ersatz Black American activist, it's not really Black, went out and bought expensive dogs. Kendi spent millions at his institute at Boston University on nothing, squandered it. The point was the upheaval. The point was the attempt at subversion and revolution. The point is destabilization at various degrees. For some, it was more minor, and for the media, which are part of the elite establishment, it wasn't overthrow. It was just nudging things enough in a direction that their opposition, the Republicans led by Trump, would not be in power for the next 4 years. That worked. For other people, it was more radical. It was about subversion. It was about creating some neo-Marxist fantasy land, which, when you look at the streets of America in 2020, 2021, and even today, what you see is something that looks like a Soviet wet dream in thinking about what the capitalist enemy should endure, should go through. Chaos, disruption, agitprop everywhere. So fast forward, it's only been 4 years, 5 years since that point, and they're at it again. Ta-Nehisi Coates is now out with his book, The Message, Message, don't know. And he's back on the cover of magazines. New York Magazine has his big, shining, happy, intelligent-looking face on that cover. And it is an invitation for a confrontation. That's what's going on in that cover. But this time, what they are telling you, what Ta-Nehisi Coates is telling you, is that it's time to globalize BLM in the form of intifada, Palestinian intifada. This is the next effort in the same campaign that we saw 4 years ago. Do you think it's a coincidence that this is coming out weeks before the next election, where Trump has a very real possibility of winning? Of course not. Do you think that campuses in the United States, elite campuses where students pay or their parents pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for them to study the sociology of doorknobs or the sociology of scallops? Those are two things I was actually taught at one of those elite universities. Those were papers that were revered in the study of the sociology of science. Do you think these students rioting, building encampments, harassing Jewish students, making Zionism into this boogeyman is just about the Palestinian cause? If it were, where were they for the last 5, 10, 15 years? Where were they when Hamas was executing Palestinians for being gay or for collaborating with the evil Zionists? Or when Bashar Assad was slaughtering his own citizens by the hundreds of thousands? Where were they then? Why now is the question. Why now is Ta-Nehisi Coates on the cover of New York Magazine, which, by the way, is undergoing its own separate scandal, as its Washington correspondent was accused of being obsessively in pursuit of Robert Kennedy Jr. But why is this happening now? And that is the reason. The reason is because this is 2021 redux. And while they can't do the same thing with BLM, which has run its course, and there's not the energy, the appetite, or even among the American people, the tolerance for another round of that kind of violence, disruption, subversion, we have a new current thing, that being the Palestinian conflict. We have a new villain, and that's one that's been explicitly tied to so-called white supremacy. And now it's called Zionism. It's a different name. It's the same, serves the same purpose. What's being attempted right now is election interference. It's an attempt, again, by some on the spectrum to swing the election in the favor of the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, by using an outside issue to do so, and by putting that across the media as a way to get the message out. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's an attempt, in this case, extremely explicit, no one's hiding a thing, to subvert American democracy. That is what they are telling you. They'll tell you in different formats. Some will tell you that it is an attempt to destroy the capitalist system, the free market system that America is built on. Some others will tell you that it's an attempt to instill Sharia law in America. Some will tell you other things. Some will tell you a story from the woke right, as it's now being called. I call it the scumbag right, that it's an attempt to restore white racial native purity to the country. Somehow they do that in lockstep with the Islamists and the media. It's kind of weird. Nevertheless, that's what's happening right now. So when you look at that cover of New York Magazine and all the other covers that are featuring Ta-Nehisi Coates, brilliant wonderkind of racial politics in America, I'd advise or urge you to look at it with a little bit of skepticism, to think twice about not just what you're being told. I think most people out there can recognize it for the nonsense that it is, but why you're being told this particular thing at this particular moment. We are now in possession of a very valuable idea, a lot of us, which is that the media we once trusted not only is no longer worthy of our trust, but has even lost credibility, which means that far from believing the things that we say that it tells us are implicitly true, we now think that what they tell us is probably not true. And that's probably correct. So I urge you, speak out, find independent sources. We can all disagree on a lot of this stuff. That's okay. But I think when we dig deeper and we look at root causes for what's being told, why, when, where, and how, we converge on something, which is that there is a lie at work, just as there was with COVID, with BLM, with the Biden administration, Hunter Biden's supposedly fake laptop, with the disinformation industry that's popping up before our eyes. And the only way for us to resist is to speak out.